In today's episode, I speak with Robert Nelson, the CEO of Just Mystic. Robert's super impressive. His background includes being in the Marines, working at Nike, going to business school, working in AI. But now he started his own company called Just Mystic, which is a really impressive D2C apparel brand. And what I like about this conversation is he's doing things with his own perspective. He talks about with starting a brand, how most people go to e-commerce, but really the opportunity is offline and how he started offline, which by the way, that's what most D2C startups do, and how he got really good success by riding the wave of going offline, but also aligning his brand with an actual town and city that's blowing up and getting a lot of traction. We also talk about things he learned from being in the military, what he learned from business school and management consulting, and how that's applied to being a leader. He comes up with a couple really interesting tactics or frameworks around being brilliant with the basics. Also talking about being a professional, even as a small company, and how things like that allow you to kind of be noticed and stand out. We also talk about how he's bridged the offline experience with his brand to online with a really smart activation within his flagship store. He also talks about how he got started by leveraging a high traffic area in his town and doing a pop-up tent around it to validate a concept and to validate products. But it's a really fun episode for anyone that's looking to get started with their own brand. I think you'll really enjoy this episode. All right, Robert, can you tell me what is Just Mystic, and can you give me any color on like how old the company is or the size of the company?
Yeah, for sure. So Just Mystic, we're an apparel brand. We fit into kind of the coastal lifestyle niche. We also pull influences from really three fashion categories. The first category being prep wear, the second category being sportswear, and the third category being streetwear. So that's kind of we try to find a sweet spot in those categories, and we're essentially bringing what an aesthetic in that sweet spot to the market that we think is different, that the market doesn't really have yet. And so, yeah, we're an apparel brand in that space. We are based in Mystic, Connecticut, which I can give a little color on Mystic, Connecticut. But that's where we're based. We have a brick-and-mortar store, a brand new one that I think we'll talk about, a new flagship store. We're also online, of course. We're doing a little bit of wholesale. But yeah, so based in Mystic, Connecticut. Mystic, Connecticut is kind of a small town on the coast. It's about 3 hours from New York City, about 2 hours from Boston. Really awesome kind of intersection there because we're getting traffic from both locations. We're also pretty close to where a lot of people do spend their summers, like Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, that area. But we're like actually on land, not an island. And yeah, we get just in the summer alone, Mystic is now getting over 1 million visitors a year. So small place, massive foot traffic driven by the boutiques and the food scene. It's actually kind of a big culinary destination now, but also you have Mystic Aquarium, which is one of the top aquariums in the world, and you have Mystic Seaport Museum, which is one of the largest maritime museums in the world. So those draw a ton of visitors. So great foot traffic which is a bit surprising given just the size of the actual location. And so really the brands, kind of getting back to, why and how we started, really have been watching Mystic grow as this destination for many years now, and to really a booming destination that's very, very desirable for people to live even year round. And it felt like, this is a place with history, with culture, with a great community. So let's build a brand around that. Not too different from, the idea, the concept of the Hollister brand, or even Vineyard Vines, and some other brands that are, kind of location based, like Santa Cruz as well. But it felt like, yeah, it was the right time to build a brand around this community And, that's really the identity that we're shaping. And so that started in 2021. So we're a little over 2.5 years old, and really, yeah, kind of getting into our third full year now, which is super
That's
exciting.
cool. And what a smart idea. I'm a big fan of a startup idea or a brand or something where you can ride the wave that's only going to get bigger. Or like you've heard like the barnacle phrase of like be the barnacle on a big whale. It's like launching a Shopify app in the early days and just writing that. Or being an app right as the iPhone launches. And you're kind of doing that in a D2C way. It's like, here's this town that has always been special, but now it's becoming more and more popular, and there's more and more people coming to it. Let me come in and be the brand that helps kind of, really capitalize on it, but also represent it the right way. I don't think I've seen that too much. You mentioned like Vineyard Vines and other brands like that really have their identity attached to a town, but that's super thoughtful. I mean, how much of this was like you being a business school guy, looking at the numbers, looking at traffic and population versus, this kind of more creative side of you that's like, actually, this should just exist.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely both. Being a business school guy, I did a lot of financial modeling on it, and I said, kind of did the classic modeling of like, what's 1% of what we think the foot traffic is, and is that viable in some kind of way? And ultimately, the answer was yes. Doing that, that kind of simple math, but also part of me was just yearning to build my own business. And I've worked in corporate, I worked in big organizations. I was in the Marines right out of college, and then I was in management consulting, and then I joined Nike after business school. And that's kind of where I learned the apparel game. And there was this kind of a point where, I said, I am going to start my own business here. I have a number of ideas that I think I can prototype. And, being from Connecticut, being from the Mystic area, and having watched this growth, kind of just, it was a right timing, right time, right place kind of situation for me to, launch my own venture and to particularly do that in the apparel space. But yeah, it certainly helps when those desires line up with with your modeling, and that's kind of how it works.
And you have a we'll call it a hot take, but like a lot of people when launching a brand, it's like, all right, D2C, Shopify, throw up your online store, and that's where you start and where you grow. However, because it's like, especially with the pandemic, it's like online shopping's only going up and up and up. You kind of have an opposite view of D2C versus brick and mortar. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the stat that I like to put out there is that 85% of U.S. commerce is still happening in person. So obviously that leaves 15% happening online. Of course, the online business, you're connecting to the whole world. Brick and mortar, it's a more confined geography. But nonetheless, I think those are some very powerful numbers, and it points to the fact that people still love to shop in person. They love, especially if you're doing something like apparel or footwear, where hand feel is really important. Hand feel is kind of an industry term, but like literally, I see people come in our brick and mortar all the time, and the first thing that they're doing, they're just like, I don't even know if they realize they're doing it, but they're just walking through, kind of like touching the shirts, touching the hat, they're touching things. And that hand feel you can't get online, of course. You order things, if you like it, you keep it. If you don't, you send it back, which ends up being a huge cost to DTC businesses, which is a whole different part of the equation. So I think personally, it's very, very powerful if you can start in a brick and mortar, you build a community from that base. And yes, you can also add more stores down the line as well. But I think, you build that foundation, a literal, tangible, physical foundation, brick and mortar, you build the community, you build the identity around it, something that is like a HQ for your customers to even, want to travel to as well and kind of be there. And then, you can kind of bolt on these other channels, these other revenue opportunities, whether it's just direct e-commerce on your website or email marketing, SMS marketing, that type of stuff. So yeah, I think it is a little bit contrarian, but I think also a lot of people because we live in this digital world. We're on our phones all the time. We just think like, oh, everything's digital now. But in reality, so much shopping and so much of the customer experience happens in a physical
Yeah,
space.
and the dirty little secret of these like iconic or famous D2C brands is that a lot of them did start offline. Like even Warby Parker in the early days in New York, people were running up to their offices to try on glasses before they did the whole home try on program and everything. Even a lot of the early stage brands that we work with at our agency, I mean, their pop-up shops are what put them on the map as far as getting customers and more importantly customer feedback, because when you're with them in person you get that feedback, whereas when they buy online you're like, please fill out this survey so we know like what you think, whereas if they're in the store they just like, oh, the neck fits weird, and you're like, oh, okay, thank you, we'll tweak that. I mean, I'd be interested, like when you launched this, did you start with the brick and mortar or did you start with pop-up shops? Did you start like selling merch out of your trunk to get that feedback, or was it taking a big risk of signing a lease?
No, we've kind of, it was twofold. I mean, yes, again, you do have to have e-commerce, right? So like, went to Shopify, built out a very basic website, but we also launched a pop-up. So we kind of had both in tandem, just because like if you're talking to somebody on the street, if you are able to point them to a website as well, there's kind of this element of credibility that they're like, oh yeah, you're not just like selling something out of a truck. But really, the strategy was, okay, launch a little pop up, and that's what we did. So we had a little pop up with a tent with some of our core
Wait,
brands,
where's
like
this
a
tent?
few
Are
of
you on
our
the side of
first
the
like very big.
road or like a farmer's
Oh
market?
yeah, I mean it's so ridiculous when we walk by the space that we were in and kind of look at where we started. There's a famous, increasingly famous restaurant called Oyster Club um, in Mystic, Connecticut. The chef, her name's Renee Toupons. She's actually a finalist this year for the James Beard Top Chef Award. So it's a fantastic restaurant. And right next to them is this like plot of grass with like a little rocky backdrop, some big granite boulders. And there's just this little grassy area that's owned by the Mystic Museum of Art, and they don't really use the space. And so we just said, hey, like you have this little manicured space, and we're literally talking like this might be like 500 to maybe at most 1,000 square feet, and literally just enough for a tent. And it's on kind of one of the side main roads in Mystic and downtown, a very pleasant area. And so yeah, we put up a tent and had a couple of fold up tables. That we, my sister, our creative director and co-founder, she's a designer. She's done a lot of interior design. So she made our tent look really really nice. But it was a tent, and we had two folding tables, and we had some crew necks, hoodies, t-shirts, stickers, the very basic things. And basically we went out for, I think it was 5 weekends or so in early fall of 2021. And we just, that was direct feedback that we're getting from customers. We had customers running up to us being like, I can't believe this concept doesn't exist already in Mystic. Like, that was like what we commonly heard, or just, just like excitement around just wearing something branded with Mystic. And, and we also got some feedback like, oh, could you do this? Could you do this? And, of course, like you can only take so much feedback. But nonetheless, as you were just talking about a minute ago, I mean, like, yeah, that feedback that you're getting in person is so critical. And that's what we got in the pop-up over these like 5 weeks. And ultimately we said, okay, we have something here. Now we really need to, focus on finding that brick and mortar space.
How, okay, so you validate, hey, people want this. You're selling products out of the nice tent, and I was just checking out Oyster Club because my sister's moving to Providence. I was like, hey, this is an hour from Providence. She needs to go here. This is a cool spot. You get validation and the product, you get feedback. Walk me through that next step, because that's a big move to be like, all right, let me sign a lease or get this space. Like, how did you, because you're very analytical, how are you thinking through that like financial move and that business move?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to this day, I mean, I manage a pretty tight spreadsheet of our cash flow. I have a great fractional CFO that we've brought on board who helps a ton with that. But I still, have a pretty tight hold on those things. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of modeling and kind of figuring out, okay, and making some educated guesses based on the feedback we had from the pop up, which was okay, like what are going to be our core pieces? What are our core styles? What are the core colors? And obviously, we had a certain budget in mind, and ultimately it said, okay, like let's be a little bit conservative here. We're not going to go crazy with the colorways. We're not going to go crazy with the number of styles, but like let's stick to what we know works. And let's start there within our budget and order X number of pieces per style per color, and that's how we're going to initially populate our assortment in our store. So it was a lot of just frankly a lot of number crunching, some educated guesses, but also being conservative. And I think this is kind of also like in some of those principles that I've seen you outline. What is it, like your 40 principles or your 21 principles? What is it? The 22 principles. And I think it's like one of those principles is like, you don't want to have, you want to have a very disciplined product portfolio. And you don't want to have too much, especially at the start. And that was very, very key to, our thinking early on, which is like, okay, let's keep the product portfolio super tight to what we know and within our budget. And then aside from that, I think there's a huge conversation around what is that customer experience going to be like, because you want people to have a great experience. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how are we going to design the actual space, and ultimately kind of merged the customer experience with the product assortment, and that's kind of how it all initially came
Yeah,
together.
so validate the idea. You get the brick and mortar, trying to be very cost conscious on this because, like, I assume you're kind of like self funding this, or maybe like friends and family, as opposed to like raising VC money, right? To get to this phase.
Yeah, I mean, this is all bootstrapped. I think the apparel industry is a tough one for VCs just because the multiples are low. But knew that going into it, and ultimately have planned to bootstrap it for as long as possible until our cash flow. We have cash coming from our operations. Um, yeah, so had to be very cautious there, but we were also pretty optimistic. Again, based on the validation that we had, and based on just I think the conservative take that we were taking. We weren't going to be like crazy in what we were ordering. We were starting pretty simple. So I think simplicity is a bit of a virtue when you're starting a business, and if you get too complex too fast, that can hinder your growth a little bit. So you know start simple, move to complex is one of the principles that
Yeah.
we talk about all
So
the
you're,
time.
you're able to start monetizing this brick and mortar location from people that live there, people that are probably visiting and want something that kind of like reflects the brand of the town, right? Which is exciting. But you've done something well where like we've seen other brands try and do this where you like merge the offline and the online, right? Because you don't want their experience with the brand to be done after they leave the store, and you've talked about an activation in the store to one, get people engaged with the brand, but two, to get them in their database. Like talk about what you've been trying to do there to activate people offline to online.
For sure. Yeah, this has been super exciting. So also one clarification. So we moved in our first brick and mortar, which was an excellent starting point. But then we actually got an offer for a larger space, almost 3,000 square feet, which we moved into in January. So that's our new flagship store, which we just opened super excitingly at the end of February. And so as part of that build out, and again thinking how to kind of rethink what's our product strategy, what's the customer experience strategy, and how does it all come together. And as part of that, we opened a permanent photo booth, which is what you were getting at. And so I think photo booths have been on the rise for at least a decade. They've been around for many decades, but they've really been on the rise over the last decade. Anybody who's been at a wedding probably has seen a photo booth there. Corporate events have them. There's a lot of different flavors of them. Now, some brands have started to install either permanent or pop-up ones. Nike had a few pop-ups like in 2017. Lululemon now has one in their flagship in London. London, for whatever reason, London, United Kingdom, loves their photo booths, and like a lot of stores have to have photo booths there. So, anyways, we kind of looked at that data. We said, you know what, like a photo booth is an awesome way to create an engaging experience for our customers, whether they buy something or not. We have this like little lollipop sign on the street outside our door, and it says photo booth and points inside. And so people walking down the street, whether they want to shop at all, they see that, they're like, oh, photo booth, and they pop in our store and they jump in the photo booth. And there's two parts to the photo booth, which is kind of key to like where we're going here, which is there's the free digital version. So you pop in the photo booth, take 3 photos, and then you give us your email to start an experience, and then we'll send you the photos immediately. And you can share them on social media. You can just save them to your phone. You can do whatever you want. And later on, we're going to add a video component as well. But that's kind of just the basic free version, free, with an asterisk, because we get your email. Then there's a paid version, which is you pay $5 and you get your classic 2x4 strip that you print out, and you can take those with you. So that's really kind of the digital experience that we've brought into our store, which has been super engaging for our customers. They're having a ton of fun with it. Like, we can see the photos that they're taking. People, like, the joy is incredible, it's palpable, and ultimately we are now building our email database probably 5 to 10 times faster than through our other channels.
No, I love that. I've seen some brands try and do that at pop-ups well and not well, but the fact that you have it at your flagship is amazing. And I want to nerd out a little bit on people thinking through getting a brick and mortar location. Like, one, like the location that you chose, and then two, you mentioned having a sign to like come in for photo booth. Like, have you A/B tested on the actual signage as far as like what gets people to actually like come in to your store more than others? Because when I lived in New York, I loved walking by sandwich shops that would have really clever chalkboard writing on their signs to see what they were doing. I don't know how much you nerd out on that, or if it's like you'd love to do that but not enough time.
I would love to. I think I would love to A/B test it. I mean, I think honestly, and if one of your listeners wants to follow with me, if they have any good intel on this, like, I would love to find a good, simple system for tracking foot traffic coming in the door. I know there's a few products out there. There's one I've been exploring, but yeah, if any of your listeners have any intel on like a really good foot traffic tracker for brick and mortar, hit me up, because that's essentially what we could use the A/B test, right? I mean, you could do it manually, just like using a clicker, people come through the door. But so we haven't done that. I think it's a great idea. It's more anecdotal that I've just been like, since we put the lollipops down outside, it's like, wow, those photo booth numbers are like really ticking up, which is incredible. But yeah, going back to picking a location. I mean, the most obvious thing is just, what's the foot traffic? Is it a high density foot traffic area? And, if you're somebody who's looking to start a brick and mortar, and feel like you're reaching a little bit to being like, oh, I hope the foot traffic is good, I just wouldn't do it. I think that the number one key is foot traffic, because honestly, when people get in a store, if you have decent product, a decent customer experience, people are going to buy something. And that is just, we are consumers. We like to buy things. And so if you're in the right location, you're going to have sales. But if you feel like you are like, oh, maybe this like side street, is going to be okay, I would just be patient if you can and wait for the right location, because it is really about location, location, location. And then after you have that location, creating a really nice customer experience, having good signage, doing collaborations with your community, with the businesses around you, to kind of get that word out and just be a good partner, good business partner
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
community.
Sometimes it's that simple, and yeah, you don't want to settle, because even if you're just around the corner, man, it makes all the difference if you're missing out. Um,
Absolutely.
so you've expanded locations. You're like maximizing, growth from the brick and mortar. talk about going beyond Mystic or growing online. Like, where is your head at right now as you've got the flagship store? What's the next level of growth that you're looking to get to?
Next level of growth is it's two things. It is e-commerce and it's also wholesale. And so part of basically to get growth in either of those channels, we're focusing on building out product lines that are a little bit broader, and that are more kind of representative of like a coastal identity and some of the history that we have from where we are, which is like sailing and shipbuilding, and integrating that into product lines, integrating that into design, integrating that into styles, um, and just basically creating a little bit broader product portfolio that has broader reach. It resonates with like a broader population. Like what I'm wearing today, I'm wearing a super super high quality heavyweight hoodie that Supreme would sell for $300. We're selling it for $80 today. It's the same quality, but we're a new brand, and so we're starting somewhere different. But ultimately, this is like generic isn't the right word, but it's a piece that resonates more broadly with a bigger population. And it's something that we can sell into wholesale channels. It's something that we can sell online as just a new apparel brand. And it doesn't matter if you've been in Mystic or you've never been there. It's a piece that you're going to look at and be like, oh, that's like a really sick piece. The quality looks amazing. Like, I'm going to get that. So yeah, so when we think about growth, it goes back to the product portfolio and creating products that have broad resonance with
Mhm.
a large population.
That's awesome. And then I'm interested as you've kind of gone down this entrepreneurial path, like what, because you've got an interesting winding road to getting here. Three of the things I want to hit on is kind of around like leadership as you're kind of like building your own thing. From what were your main takeaways from the Marines, from business school, and then from your time in management consulting? Like, what have you taken away from that to lead to this path?
There's a lot to bite off there, um, but yeah, I'll do my best at kind of like summarizing a few of those things. I mean, yeah, there is no better place to learn leadership than the military. And, in my opinion, there's no better place specifically than the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps takes leadership so intensely serious. And, I would say, the first word that kind of comes to mind when I think about what I learned from the Marines, it's accountability, and it's accountability for yourself. It's also then expecting and teaching accountability to the people that you are working with or the people that you're leading, and in some cases it's people above you and holding them accountable. So I think part of that, that takes a lot of guts, a lot of internal fortitude to be able to call somebody out or even to hold yourself accountable. But ultimately, I think that is something that I've kind of carried with me, since my time in the Marines, and just making sure that I take responsibility, I take accountability for any failures in the business, and that I hold other people accountable for any failures. And at the same time, you celebrate when people do things well, and you show recognition. I think that's also part of accountability. It's a two-sided coin. So accountability is super super important. Um, I think when going after the Marines, I went into management consulting for 6 years at Booz Allen. Fantastic, incredible organization. I was super happy that I could have spent a whole career there, but I've really wanted to do a lot of different things in my time. So from Booz Allen, I think it was more of the art and science of um, art and science of essentially strategy, and which I've learned more about it in business school, but ultimately that's been super important to how I've been thinking about our business and growing our business. And so I think I had kind of like a formative education at Booz Allen in strategy, which is incredible. And then yeah, business school. I mean, business school is hard to exactly point to perhaps leadership, and more so just some of the tactical and like kind of operational skills that I picked up there, which was super incredible. And I would think I would tell anybody that business school is an incredible opportunity. That if you can do it wherever you can go, do it. It's a great place to build a network, meet incredible people, be inspired by the people around you. And so ultimately from business school, I think I just again kind of pulled out some of the more like tactical skills that have been super super helpful. Um, and then finally, kind of the step after business school is Nike, and um, what people often ask, hey, what can you take away from Nike? And the number one thing I always say about that is professionalism. Nike is one of the leading organizations in the world because they can recruit the best talent in the world, an incredible roster of just professionals. And so I think working at Nike really got to see, okay, this is how professionals operate, and that is something that I've taken with me, to building Just Mystic. And it's it doesn't matter how big we are, it doesn't matter what our revenue is, how big our team is, but we can be really professional in what we do. We can be really professional in how we communicate. We can be really professional in how we work with our local partners, regardless of our size. And I think that's just something that you can do at any stage of growth. Is just be super professional, communicate super well. Do these kind of be brilliant at the basics, which is something we talk about in the Marines a lot. If you're brilliant at the basics, then you can kind of do the more complex things. But you have to do the basics super well. You have to be super professional, be really organized, etc.
What do you think are the basics with your business or your brand, right? Like, or I guess with the business, like what are the things where you're like, okay, these are the 3 to 5 things. If we're good at these, this is the right foundation. These are the basics.
Yeah, so that goes to, we are building a brand. So I think there's a few things that I think about when building a brand that are kind of the basics. And so number one, it's what are our core styles? Is it a crew neck? Is it a hoodie? It doesn't matter. This goes for any business that you're building. It could be a tech product, anything. It's like, what are kind of the core? What is the core thing, or the core things that we're going to set out to do initially, and let's do those super super well. And so that's kind of like where we started to say, okay, crew necks, hoodies, t-shirts. Those are our core styles. Those are like the brand basics for us. Then you think about, okay, what are our brand guidelines? And brand guidelines, I honestly didn't really hear people talk about this a whole lot, prior to starting my own company. But it's your brand guidelines essentially spells out a few things. It spells out, okay, like what are our logos? How can our logos be used, or how shouldn't they be used? Because that's so important. That's how you communicate to the world who you are. What are our fonts? Again, like, you don't want to be overly complex. You want to have some unique fonts, have just like 2 to 3 maybe, but that's in your brand guidelines. What is our tone of voice? Are we friendly? Are we playful, inclusive, exclusive, etc.? The tone of voice, again, that's in your brand guidelines. And you could include other things in your brand guidelines, just like you can include like, what your identity is. Like you could say this is where we sit in the market, which is a little bit more of like a strategy thing. But ultimately, if you go through the process of building out your brand guidelines, again, regardless of the industry that you're in, that is one of the core basics that you have to have, so that you can, essentially say this is who we are and this is how we're different from other companies. So again, kind of starting off with those like, what are your core products? What's your brand guidelines? And then a little bit more specific to apparel, but can be applicable in other industries as well, which is our tech pack. Our tech pack, essentially having a tech pack template is like, this is the list of requirements that we send to a manufacturer to build a hoodie, for instance. This is the body length, this is the sleeve length, this is the hem length, all these very specific things, also about like the material and the color. Maybe the same for like any other physical product. You have, various requirements. And so those 3 things, our core styles, our brand guidelines, and our tech packs, are kind of like the core building blocks that we have to be super, super good at in order to build great product, and to build great product that is differentiated from other businesses.
Yeah, because that it's so interesting. Like with earlier stage companies, because a lot of the companies, they aren't a brand, they're a product, right? And they launch on the back of a flagship product. But then you have other companies that launch, and it really is about the brand. So I think depending on what your go to market strategy is or your validation strategy can really dictate on like how much emphasis to put on brand in the early days. But there's no doubt that as you grow, brand essentially can become all that you have as a point of differentiation. So it's because I've seen companies like overinvest in branding agencies at an early stage, and it's like, oh man, you should have done that. But then you see brands where because they didn't invest in brand, there's no point of differentiation and they get overtaken. So I think it can be a tough balancing act when you're in those early days of like where to put your time, money, and resources. But I think with what you've done, I mean, brand is so core to what you guys have built that it was a no brainer. You had to do that really well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something that we struggle with as we kind of think through how deep to go into that. Um, I'm also interested, like, if you look back, if you were starting this all over today, what would you do differently, or what like advice would you give to yourself?
I would say I would say patience is always, something we could always do better. And I think I've been a little impatient at times with some of our product decisions. And we've made some bad decisions on a few products that like haven't sold super fast. And I think, you know, that part of that was being a little bit reactionary to like, oh, that's like we got to have that piece. Like that's super cool. That's trending. We got to have it. And I think that was part reactionary, part a little impatience, and could have saved us on some costs, obviously, cut some of our expenses, but also there's just like some headaches of trying to create this product super fast, which didn't really need to happen. So I think being more patient. If I were to go back on a few things, it'd probably be that. But I think it's a tough question, honestly, because like aside from that, I think we've done a lot of things really well, and I think some of that is you know there's certainly some luck, and I think any business requires luck to be successful. That's just how it goes. But there's also been a lot of planning and preparation, and a lot of thoughtfulness in what we've been doing. So there isn't a whole lot that I could really change at this point because I'm just honestly grateful that it's been going as well as it has, and I think it's going to keep going super well. Again, with also a little bit of luck and the economy continuing to do well. So it's a tough question. Kind of beating around a little bit, but I mean, I think patience would be like kind of the one thing because I do think that is in some cases where we missed the mark on a couple of products and maybe rushed to get something into market, and it just hasn't sold well, and it you know hasn't killed us, but it just gave us some
Yeah.
headaches that we didn't need to
No,
have.
that's super helpful. And like one thing that I think through, like as a business owner, I heard this quote where like the ceiling of the company is your ceiling, and it's like, do you have a growth mindset? Are you growing to the level that your company needs to grow, or how do you grow with the company, right? And that's something that I kind of struggle with. It's like working on the business rather than in the business. Like right now, like where's your time going, and is that where you want it to go, and how are you looking to grow as like a CEO?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like your point about like the ceiling of the company is essentially my ceiling, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think I am not satisfied with where we are. I want to certainly achieve some revenue, some big revenue numbers. I want to achieve some big valuation numbers, and ultimately to get there, it's the brick and mortar, this flagship that we have that I've talked a lot about. That is a foundational piece, but there's a ceiling to that. There will be a plateau. There's only so much foot traffic you can get through that. But again, great foundation. So it's really to achieve some of these bigger targets that I have in mind. it is growing the e-commerce, it is growing wholesale. It's also doing, some B2B projects, and B2B, when I talk about B2B, that's really us like working with local partners or not even or regional partners who want apparel. They want really good apparel, and we come in and we say, okay, we'll source it, we'll design it, we'll produce it for you. And that could be a really big channel for us as well. Um, so yeah, it's I want to grow the business to be many multiples of what it is today, and so I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about, okay, what does that product portfolio look like to help us get into the wholesale channels, to get into the e-commerce, to build out the e-commerce further. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about the product portfolio, thinking a lot of time thinking about where to make new investments. And we just invested a lot of money in building out this flagship. So it's okay, what's the next big investment, which is probably going to be our website, which is good. It works, but it could be cleaner, and that'll be a big investment. So, and again, if we're growing out the e-commerce business, you want to have a really good website. So, product portfolio, where to invest our capital, and ultimately hiring. Who are we going to hire, and which roles, so that I can continue to take a role that is looking across the whole business and not being super deep in every part of the business, but more so like an inch deep, mile wide, and kind of like moving chess pieces as needed, and being able to be in a position that I have people I can trust, so that I can take that bigger view and kind of see where to direct the
Yeah,
business.
you and I have even talked about like one key hire a lot of people don't do, is a chief of staff. And like, can you like talk through like when does a chief of staff like work out? When does it really help? Versus maybe when it doesn't work out or when it's not the right time to hire one.
Yeah, I think the chief of staff. Yeah, I think the chief of staff is super important to hire. I was one at Nike, for a bit of time, so I kind of understand the role in and out quite a bit. I worked with other chiefs of staff and kind of saw good ones, so okay ones. I think to be a good chief of staff, you need to be smart, you need to be really resourceful, and you need to be like able to lead kind of on your own with like minimal direction. And so what that would look like in practice in the business at Just Mystic, if and when we bring on a chief of staff, is like, hey, chief of staff, this is like a core project we need to work on. We need to basically revamp our whole website. I need you to like basically take on that project end to end. If you need to hire a developer, if you need to hire a designer, do it. But essentially, like from here we are at point A, take it to point B, which is basically a revamped website with better functionality, a better customer experience, right? And that's like something that I would expect a chief of staff could just basically hand it off to them. They run with it. I'm not expecting them to do all the technical work, but they know how to be resourceful, know how to like find the right people to basically make this happen. Give them an objective and let them accomplish it. And that's what a good chief of staff can do. And then when they're done with that project, you put them onto a new project. And at the same time, they might, depending on what the capacity is, they might be kind of doing other work. Like it could be, you could have a weekly stand-up meeting, and they might be leading that stand-up every week, with your core leadership team. That's large. That was kind of what I did a lot at Nike, which was I had a bunch of strategic projects, but I was also essentially the right hand to our head of digital product at Nike, and she had a large leadership team of about 12 senior leaders. Essentially, I was facilitating meetings and leading agendas, and just kind of making sure that everybody was on track. And that's what a really, really good chief of staff does. And ultimately, they're a thought partner. They're somebody that a CEO or other senior leader can just really trust to get a job done. Hard jobs, strategic jobs, sometimes tactical, but ultimately they're a key resource that allows a leader to have more bandwidth, more capacity to think about the broader business.
Yeah, I like what you said about being resourceful and being able to act with maybe limited information or data or context. I think what you said, because if you get that right person, man, it can just open up your bandwidth to focus on the big things. Because all it takes is one tedious task you can't delegate that can suck away all your time. and the impact that can have when you're a CEO or C level can be detrimental to a business if you get pulled into those things, right? And it's something that if people are able to do and you can find the right one, it's amazing. I think I mentioned we found someone accidentally who they were really good at. They had a master's in project management and they were also technical, and that ended up being a really nice sweet spot of two skills. But I liked your call out too of like having that strategic mind because they need to be able to operate with you and other senior leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've thought a little bit about, there's a group on LinkedIn called the Chief of Staff Network. I don't frankly know too much about how they operate and kind of like what their body is like, but I've reached out to them just to inquire, hey, like, would you be able to source just an intern for the summer? Because I think that could be useful. I approach that with some, I'm a little cautious with that because I think one of the key things of a chief of staff is that they're fairly experienced, fairly seasoned. They know how to talk to other, senior people. They, kind of have a presence, and there's kind of like a level at which I think you might be too junior to be a chief of staff unless they're kind of just doing more like, very tactical things. Um, so there is kind of like that balance too of like what level of like a veteran are they? But it's something I'm considering. I might test out bringing out an intern at who might be a little bit more junior, but
Yeah.
more to
Well,
come on
that's
that.
awesome, man. Well, the last question I like to ask is what's the nicest thing anyone's done in your professional career?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, I was nominated and I won. It's called the Values and Practice Award. Um, it's a Booz Allen Award. Only like 0.1% of the workforce receives it annually. So it's like I think 20 people or something out of 20 some thousand people. Yeah, so I was nominated by a couple of people on my team. I think this is like my fifth year at Booz Allen, and yeah, ultimately won this incredible award, which came with like a great prize of like this all paid trip to like a number. I could kind of pick where I wanted to go, which is really cool. But the award aside, or the reward aside, just kind of being nominated for it, was just like a very validating and super thoughtful thing in my career that I was honored to receive it and honored to be recognized and just super grateful to the team and the individual in particular who was kind of like leading the nomination. Still very good friends with her today. She's been one of the best bosses, best managers, best leaders I've ever had, and so just incredibly grateful to have been nominated and to
Man,
have
that's a
won
cool
that award.
company to be in. And yeah, awards like that don't happen unless someone like champions it, I'm sure. So that's a lot of effort on their part where they're not really getting much on their end. So very cool.
Truly, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of championing that she had to do, and yeah, I mean, it wasn't just something I mean, there's a very long write up that she had to do, but then yeah, there's a lot of channels she had to go through and validation, and so yeah, it's totally like very low reward on her part, but maximum reward on my part, and yeah, just it was very a very selfless thing that she did, so it was
Yeah.
incredibly kind of her.
Well, nice, man. That's very cool. Well, where should people go if they want to check out your brand or you and see what you guys are doing?
Um, Yeah, always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Robert Nelson. There's a few Robert Nelsons out there, but you and I are probably connected. So if you're connected to Jim, you can find me. So feel free to reach out there. The brand, we have a lot of fun building out and being playful on Instagram. On Instagram, it's just Mystic Brand, and that's where you can kind of keep up with a lot of our the hype that we're putting out there, but just again a lot of fun that we're having. And then we have our website, of course, justmystic.com, so you can always find us there. So find me on LinkedIn, and then find our brand on Instagram at Just Mystic Brand and
Yeah, the swag's
justmystic.com.
pretty sweet. I especially like the hoodies, especially with kind of like the seagull on it. So people should definitely check it out. And I recommend people go to his Instagram to see pictures of the flagship store, because you can also see the photo booth in there, which is pretty cool. Just so you can get a feel on how Robert and his team pulled that off. But it's really well done. I think it's from April 4th, so go check out that photo. But
Yeah, we're gonna post pretty soon a more detailed look at the photo booth, so stand by for that, because yeah, it's been a big hit. It's a huge feature, and again, awesome way to engage with your community.
But it's no, man, the store looks phenomenal, all 3,000 square feet. So congrats on that, man. Thank you for listening to the Shopify Growth Show. If you found this helpful, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps other Shopify founders like you find the show. Want more Shopify advice? Sign up to the Shopify Growth Insider newsletter by GrowthHit, where we break down the top 5 growth tactics every week. Remember, you're not in this alone. Building a Shopify brand is a grind, but you got this. Keep testing, keep scaling, and don't run out of larges on Black Friday like I did. Have a good one.